Hey there, viewers. Some footage is meant to stay buried forever, but once it's out, there's no controlling the fallout. Oprah just leaked hidden footage tied to Diddy's tunnels, and what it shows about Beyoncé has left Diddy in a full-blown panic. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The footage that was never meant to surface. The building still smelled like dust and forgotten things. That thick, heavy kind of air that sticks to your throat when you breathe it in too deep. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me as I pushed through the old side door, the metal scraping loud against the frame. No one was supposed to be here anymore. They'd shut the place down 5 years ago, left it to rot after the network went belly up. Most of the others who used to work here had moved on, found new gigs, new life hidden. Maybe that's why I kept coming back. The city was changing too fast, swallowing up all the places that felt real. But inside this crumbling skeleton of a building, it was like time had gotten stuck. The hallways still had old posters peeling off the walls. The vending machines stood dead and dusty in the break room. And somewhere up on the 3rd floor, there was a whole wing where the lights would flicker on by themselves if you walked past the right spot. I wasn't here for nostalgia tonight, though. I was here for the archives. The basement hadn't been cleared out when they abandoned the network. Too many tapes, too many servers, too much junk nobody wanted to pay to haul away. But for me, it was a treasure trove. Forgotten footage, lost interviews, stuff that could still be worth something if you knew the right collectors. I had a system. Head down, gloves on, no lights unless absolutely necessary. Anything interesting, I'd stash it in a backpack and sort through it later. The stairs groaned under my boots as I made my way down. The concrete walls were slick with moisture from the last rainstorm. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom like a knife. Rows and rows of shelves stretched out in front of me, sagging under the weight of old videotapes and hard drives and dusty folders. It was supposed to be a quick run. Grab a few labeled boxes, maybe snag anything marked celebrities or special events, and get out before security, or worse, a nosy squatter, caught me. But then I saw it. Tucked all the way back behind a row of smashed filing cabinets, half buried under a tarp, was an old milk crate stuffed with unlabeled VHS tapes. Most of them were cracked or molded over. One of them, though, was different. It had a label, written in black marker, faded but still legible. Horrible. Pop House, Private 2007. I don't know why it made the hair on my arms stand up. Maybe it was the way the word private was underlined 3 times. Or maybe it was just instinct, that feeling you get when you know you're standing too close to something that's better left alone. I turned the tape over in my gloved hands. It was heavier than it should have been. I could have just walked away. Should have. But curiosity's a hell of a drug. There was an old VCR set up near the back of the room. Someone had rigged it to a portable generator a long time ago, probably to check tapes without hauling them upstairs. I dusted it off, slid the tape in, and held my breath as the machine whirred to life. The screen flickered. Static. Then darkness. Immense. The footage was rough, degraded like it had been copied too many times or left too close to a magnet. The colors bled together, turning everything into a mess of grays and greens, but it was enough to see outlines. A tunnel, stone walls, dim lights strung up along the ceiling, flickering like candles about to go out. Music, faint and warbling through the static. Something jazzy and old, out of place down there in the dark. And figures, blurry at first, moving through the corridors. Some wore suits, others long evening gowns. Their faces were mostly turned away from the camera or hidden by shadows. It felt choreographed somehow, like they were supposed to be there, like they knew where they were going. Then she appeared. At first, it was just a glimpse. A figure in a shimmery gold dress, her hair a thick, flowing halo. She moved differently than the others, hesitating at a junction, looking over her shoulder like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to keep going. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating faster. Even through the static, even through the warping and the degradation, I knew that face. Or thought I did. It was her. Beyoncé. Or someone who looked exactly like her. The camera didn't focus on her. It didn't follow her movements like you would in a staged production. It was like it had just caught her by accident. She wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling for anyone. She looked tense, uncomfortable. The figure disappeared into another hallway, and the tape kept rolling, showing more rooms, more shadows. At one point, a heavy door swung open in the background and revealed what looked like a lounge, plush furniture and strange art covering the walls. Murals of eyes, stars, hands reaching upward. I felt sick watching it. Not because anything violent or explicit was happening. It was just the wrongness of it all, like watching a dream you weren't supposed to see. I fast-forward through the rest, my fingers trembling on the controls. There was no violence, no clear criminal activity, just these gatherings in strange underground spaces. Faces half-seen, movements rehearsed yet disjointed. The woman, the one who looked like Beyoncé, never reappeared. When the tape clicked off, I sat there in the dark for a long time, the only sound the soft hum of the generator. I tried to tell myself it was a look-alike, a tribute act, a deepfake maybe, even though the footage was too old for that. Anything but what it looked like. But deep down I knew what I'd seen. And that's when my phone buzzed. I jumped, nearly knocking over the portable monitor. Fumbling for it, I saw the notification pop up on the cracked screen. One new email. No sender address. No subject line. I opened it, my thumb trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. Inside was a single line of text. This was never yours to find, but someone's finally ready to talk. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. There was no attachment, no link. Just that sentence, sitting there like a trap. I packed up the tape, yanked the VHS out of the player, shoved everything into my bag. I killed the generator, plunging the room back into heavy, suffocating darkness. As I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, I thought I heard something down there. The faint, hollow sound of a woman singing, a melody I almost recognized but couldn't place. I didn't look back. When I burst out into the night air, the city felt wrong too. Like the world above had shifted while I was underground. Like some invisible hand had turned everything just slightly to the left. I didn't know it yet, but that tape was only the beginning. The tunnels it showed weren't just hidden passageways beneath some rich man's house. They were entrances, doors to something much deeper, much older. Something no amount of fame or money could erase once the wrong people started pulling at the threads. And I had just put my hands on the first loose thread. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face, turning back over her shoulder, caught between doorways, caught between 2 worlds. And I wasn't sure anymore which world I belonged to either. Chapter 2. Whispers from the Estate. It's been years since I planned my last event. I should have let the memories rot like everything else tied to that part of my life. But some things cling to you, like smoke. No matter how many showers you take, how many times you move houses, how many names you sign at the bottom of new contracts, the smell stays in your hair. I didn't start in that world. I stumbled into it. I was good at logistics, good at making things look expensive without actually being expensive. That's why I got the first call. A friend of a friend needed someone discreet. No paper trails, no posts on social media. A gathering, they said. Private, elegant, important people. They didn't tell me whose estate it was. They didn't need to. The first thing you learn when you cross that invisible line, The line that separates normal parties from the ones that never officially happen is that you don't ask questions. You don't make small talk. You don't even make eye contact unless someone speaks to you first. And there were rules. No phones, no names, no clocks. The guests weren't supposed to know what time it was. They weren't supposed to document anything, even accidentally. You came in under aliases, wore what was provided to you, stayed where you were placed, and if you were lucky, you left before the real festivities started. The first time I saw the tunnels, I thought it was a joke. The estate was massive, sitting on the edge of a cliff like something out of a Bond movie. The kind of place with its own lake, its own helipad, but underneath it, hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, was an entire network of hallways. Polished stone floors, velvet drapes hiding dead-end corridors, soft yellow lights hanging low from the ceiling, giving everything a permanent twilight glow. It wasn't claustrophobic like you'd expect. The tunnels were wide, airy even, but they curved in strange ways. You'd think you were walking in a straight line until you found yourself back where you started, facing a wall that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. I figured it was just rich people nonsense, a gimmick, a trick to make the guests feel lost, disoriented, more likely to drink what was handed to them and go along with whatever the night brought. I didn't know then how much worse it was. My job was simple: prepare the lower lounges. That's what they called them, lounges. Like it was nothing more than a cocktail reception, like the walls weren't lined with two-way mirrors and microphones disguised as antique sconces. The guest list was read to me once, never written down. I recognized some of the names instantly: politicians, actors, titans of industries I wasn't even qualified to dream about. And then there were the others, the new blood, the young stars. They always arrived separately, heavily guarded. You could tell who mattered by the size of the entourage. The bigger the star, the smaller the group that brought them in. One night, near the middle of a sweltering summer, I got called in for something different. A special arrangement, they said. A VVIP guest, different protocols, more eyes on deck. I was setting up candles in one of the main hallways when I caught sight of her. She was surrounded by handlers in dark suits, their faces blank and unreadable. She wore a hooded cloak over her gown, but even under the dim lights, I could tell she shined underneath it. There was a magnetism to her, a gravitational pull that made everyone around her straighten their spines without even realizing it. I didn't see her face clearly, I wasn't supposed to. But the shape of her, the way she moved, like someone used to commanding stadiums full of screaming fans, was impossible to mistake. Somebody near me whispered her name under their breath, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. That was the only time I ever heard it spoken in those halls. She didn't stay long. Her group slipped through a side corridor that wasn't marked on any of the blueprints I'd been given. It led deeper underground, where the real rooms were, the ones none of the planners or caterers or musicians were ever supposed to see. Later that night, after most of the crowd had moved upstairs to the main ballroom, I lingered near the tunnel entrance, just for a minute, just to see. All I caught was a footer, a door swinging shut, the edge of a gilded frame catching the low light. Inside, something glimmered, a mirror maybe, or something worse. I never asked about that wing again. It was at another event, much smaller, more controlled, that her name came up again. Oprah. But I had been arranging flower displays in the northern lounge when a few of the estate's long-time managers came through, deep in hushed conversation. I wasn't supposed to hear them. I wasn't supposed to hear anything, really. But I did. One of them mentioned that MSW was attending that night. Another joked about how she was there to discuss the children of fame. The tone of it wasn't light, there was no admiration, it was reverent, like they were talking about a priestess arriving for a ritual. I never saw her myself. If she came through the tunnels, it was through the parts none of us were allowed to clean or decorate. The story I pieced together over the next few years was never spoken outright. It came in glances, in warnings muttered by waitstaff who had been there longer than I had, in the sudden coldness that fell over the room whenever certain topics brushed too close to the surface. Those tunnels weren't just architecture. They were passageways for a very specific kind of transaction. Fame, power, allegiance, memories made, and more importantly, memories erased. I think about that young star sometimes, the one in the cloak. I wonder if she remembers being there. I wonder if she dreams about hallways that go nowhere, about doors that lead to rooms where time doesn't exist. I wonder if she ever got out. I stayed in the game longer than I should have. Money like that makes you forget what you're sacrificing, until one day you wake up and realize there are whole years missing from your memory, whole nights you can't account for. I still have the ledger they gave me, not the real one that's locked up somewhere under layers of NDAs and legal threats, just a small leather notebook, a gift they handed out to contractors during the holidays. Inside the front cover, embossed in gold lettering, are 3 words: forget what you see. Most days I do, but every so often I catch a whiff of candle smoke where there shouldn't be any, or I hear a faint echo of music when the house is empty. And I remember the tunnels, the velvet curtains hiding doors that only opened for certain guests, the way even the most famous faces lowered their heads as they passed into the deeper halls, the way she looked back once, just once, before the handlers closed in around her, as if she was hoping someone would see her, as if she was hoping someone would remember. Chapter 3: The Vault That Shouldn't Exist. When they first handed me the job, it sounded simple enough. Scrub a handful of old surveillance backups, sanitize some digital archives, wipe the server logs so clean even the ghosts couldn't find a trace. It's what I did for a living. Make problems disappear before they started to smell. The client wasn't listed under Diddy's name at first. That's not how they do it at this level. Shell companies, layers of legal insulation. But I recognized the address tied to the service contracts, one of his old estates, the one that had quietly changed hands a year ago when the lawsuits started piling up like corpses. The setup was supposed to be standard. Pull the drives, mirror the contents, purge everything from the root, burn the backups, confirm destruction with a notarized affidavit, cash the check. I didn't expect a vault. It was buried deep in the system, past layers of firewalls so archaic I had to dig out an old laptop just to interface with them. The security protocols weren't corporate, they were personal. Sloppy. A subdirectory with no name, just a string of numbers and symbols, tucked behind dummy folders labeled utilities and landscaping invoices. It would have stayed hidden if not for a single error message that flashed when I initiated the purge script. Vault integrity compromised, manual review required. My stomach twisted. Manual review meant I had to open it. I hesitated longer than I should have. You learn not to poke around in jobs like this. You learn to do exactly what you're paid for and not an inch more. Curiosity doesn't just kill the cat. It kills your career, your freedom, maybe even you, if you're dealing with the wrong people. But the script had already tripped an alert. I needed to see what was inside just to finish the job properly. At least, that's what I told myself. The vault wasn't organized. It was a digital attic. Files stuffed together without rhyme or reason, some labeled with dates, others with cryptic names like Harvest or Initiation Walkthrough. Most of the footage was corrupted beyond recovery, endless blocks of visual static and garbled audio, but a few files were intact enough to watch. The first one I played showed the entrance to a tunnel, polished stone steps descending into darkness, lit only by flickering wall sconces. The camera was mounted high, angled down, like someone had installed it to keep an eye on comings and goings without being seen themselves. Figures moved through the frame, some laughing, some arguing quietly, all of them dressed in the kind of clothes you only ever see in award show after parties. Satin, silk, sequins, tuxedos without ties. Their faces were hard to make out. Either they kept their heads down, or the footage was intentionally filmed to obscure identities. Another file loaded after that, this one inside a larger room. Lavish beyond reason, velvet chaise lounges, gold trim on the walls, a bar that looked like it had been carved out of a single massive crystal. At the center of the room was a shallow platform ringed with candles. People gathered around it, murmuring, sipping from delicate glasses. The footage cut before anything else happened, as if someone had only wanted to capture the gathering itself, not whatever came after. I scrolled further down the list. That's when I saw it. New star. Primary 3. The timestamp matched the dates whispered about in the darker corners of certain forums. The nights when certain pop icons, freshly anointed and barely in their 20s, were allegedly introduced to the upper echelons of entertainment's invisible hierarchy. My hand shook a little as I clicked it open. The footage was short, barely a minute, grainy as hell too, but it was enough. A figure stood at the center of a tunnel intersection, flanked by 2 handlers in dark suits. She wore a silver dress that shimmered in the low light, the fabric clinging to her like a second skin. Even though her face was obscured, turned slightly away, hair cascading over her shoulders, there was a presence about her, a gravity. I didn't need perfect resolution to recognize that presence. Some people don't just walk into a room, they shift the entire atmosphere. She looked young, vulnerable even as she squared her shoulders and tried to appear composed. The handlers gestured. She moved hesitantly toward an unmarked door at the end of the hallway. The clip ended there, frozen on the moment just before she stepped through. I sat back, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking. Didn't want to believe what the file was implying. Then I saw the email chain. It was buried in the metadata of the vault, an old thread, heavily redacted, with most of the sender and recipient information stripped out, but one fragment survived, a single line buried deep in the encryption headers. Mrs. W's foundation partners have requested limited access to primary materials. Grant temporary clearance under Project Halo. Mrs. W Foundation partners. Project Halo. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. Someone very high up, someone with ties to Oprah's world, had been granted access to whatever this vault had hidden, not for public exposure, not for justice, for discretion. I stared at the monitor for a long time, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. This wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just blackmail material. It was a record of the ecosystem itself. The tunnels beneath the fame, the machinery grinding away behind the polished smiles and manufactured narratives. And I had stumbled into it. I could have wiped it, pretended I'd never seen it, completed the job and collected my check and gone back to living in careful ignorance. Instead, I copied 3 files onto an encrypted drive. Not everything, just enough to prove the vault existed, enough to tell the story without dragging every ghost into the light. Then I scrubbed the server clean, deep enough that even I wouldn't be able to recover it later. I composed a simple message, routed through half a dozen dead drops and anonymous servers. Your house is burning. Choose carefully what you save. No name, no return address. I sent it to a journalist I trusted once, before trust became a liability. Then I threw the drive into a waterproof case, buried it in a park 3 cities away, and walked home under a sky that suddenly seemed much heavier than before. I don't know what's going to happen now. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe I just lit a fuse under a kingdom so rotten it was already ready to fall. Or maybe, and this thought keeps me up at night, maybe the ones who built the tunnels always expected them to collapse. Maybe collapse was the whole point. Chapter 4. The meeting that never happened. You'll never find records of it. No emails, no flight manifests, no hotel bookings. It wasn't the kind of meeting you could put on paper. It wasn't even the kind of thing you could whisper about in polite company. But I was there, and once you see something like that, you can't ever unsee it. It happened in the winter of 2024, not long after the lawsuits against Diddy started boiling over into something too big to ignore. Allegations stacked on allegations, victims finding their voices after years of silence. The media sharks were circling, and for the first time in a long time, the old empire started to feel vulnerable. The call came in the middle of the night, just a vibration against my nightstand and a private number flashing on the screen. I knew better than to ignore it. I wasn't told where I was going until the plane touched down. Switzerland, a private airstrip outside Geneva. A driver met me at the tarmac, no questions asked, and within an hour, I was sitting in a conference room tucked inside a resort so remote it didn't even show up on Google Maps. They called it a wellness summit. At least, that's what the few staffers who knew anything referred to it as. But there was no yoga, no spa treatments, no keynote speeches about work-life balance. There were only 24 of us, the ones who handled problems for the powerful. Not the celebrities themselves, but the fixers, the crisis managers, the legal architects who specialized in making scandals vanish before the public ever caught a whiff. We were handed plain folders as we entered. No names, just case numbers and summaries. Inside, bullet points outlined the threats, pending lawsuits, earlier potential criminal investigations, survivor coalitions forming quietly behind the scenes. Whispers that some of the evidence wasn't just circumstantial, that there were tapes, documents, physical proof that couldn't be spun or buried without a fight. It wasn't just Diddy's empire at risk. If he fell hard enough, the debris would hit a lot of people. People who had spent decades building images of philanthropy, empowerment, success. Oprah's name wasn't in the folder, neither was Beyoncé's, but we didn't need it spelled out. Everyone in that room knew who stood to lose if the wrong connections were unearthed. The first night was cautious, polite, people pretending it was just a brainstorming session, hypotheticals tossed around like casual conversation. By the second night, the real talk began. They split us into smaller groups, clustering us by our affiliations: media, music, business, entertainment, foundations. The ones with overlapping interests found each other fast, gravitating together like magnets. It was in those smaller groups, over rare scotch and nervous glances, that the real conversation. How much is recoverable? Someone asked. Can the servers be scrubbed? Another countered. Will any of the handlers testify if cornered? Who needs to be incentivized to forget? It wasn't just about protecting Diddy. Most of them didn't care about him beyond the damage he could cause if he got desperate. It was about sealing the basement doors forever, making sure whatever happened in those tunnels, in those private rooms, stayed buried. The old logic was simple. When one pillar starts to crack, you reinforce the others before the whole temple comes down. Some advocated for selective leaks, controlled burns, sacrificing small scandals to distract from the bigger sins. Release grainy footage of drug use, infidelity, maybe even a whispered abuse allegation, but nothing that connected to the deeper machinery. The public had a short memory. Give them a scandal juicy enough and they'd forget to keep digging. Others, the ones who had weathered storms before, insisted on total silence, no leaks, no responses, no acknowledgement that there was anything worth finding. Deny until death. And then there was a third camp, quieter, angrier. They didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. Some things weren't forgivable. Some stains didn't wash out with PR statements or charity galas. Some of the footage, if it ever surfaced, would rock reputations to the bone. I didn't hear Oprah speak directly. She wasn't in the room, People like her don't attend these meetings personally, but her proxies were there, calm and composed, delivering her preferences in careful language. According to them, Oprah wasn't willing to put her shield up for Diddy this time. Not fully. She would protect her foundations, her image, her own circle of influence. But if it came down to it, if the walls really started to buckle, she wouldn't throw herself onto the fire to save someone who had built his empire on tunnels and shadows. It wasn't framed as betrayal, it was framed as survival. I remember one line in particular, passed down from her camp through 3 intermediaries before it reached our ears. Not all legacies are worth preserving. Some were meant to burn. Nobody dared say her name after that, not even in whispers. The rest of the summit blurred into a ritual, more than a conference, bloodless but brutal, alliances being reforged behind closed doors, unspoken pacts sealed with firm handshakes and darting eyes. We left Switzerland with new orders tucked into our briefcases, new scripts to whisper into the ears of media outlets, new silences to enforce. Seal the tunnels, mute the survivors, smother the embers before they could catch the whole forest ablaze. But as my plane lifted off the tarmac, slicing up through heavy, frozen clouds, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Some cracks can't be plastered over. Some truths, once glimpsed, refuse to stay buried. And somewhere, in a dark vault, or a forgotten backup drive, or a trembling survivor's hands, the match was already lit. We hadn't gathered to prevent a collapse. We'd gathered to buy ourselves time. Time we no longer had. Chapter 5. The first leak. It was still dark when the knock came. 3 short raps, sharp enough to rattle the door in its frame. I didn't move at first, half convinced I'd imagined it. A trick of exhaustion and too many nights spent chasing shadows. But then I heard the scream. Something sliding against the threshold, and by the time I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the hallway outside my apartment was already empty. The package was small. No return address. No markings except a single strip of duct tape stretched across the top, with 2 words scrawled in black marker: foundation only. My hands moved on instinct, bringing it inside, locking the door behind me, deadbolt and chain. Old habits die hard. The package was light. I peeled the tape away carefully, half expecting it to be a bluff, a prank, a trap. But inside, wrapped in a sheet of nondescript gray paper, was a battered flash drive. No logos, no branding, just an old cheap drive like the ones you could buy in gas stations 10 years ago. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time, the weak light from the overhead bulb buzzing faintly in the silence. I thought about the people I'd pissed off lately. Thought about the questions I'd asked that maybe I shouldn't have. Thought about the calls that went dead too fast and the glances over my shoulder that weren't just paranoia anymore. Then I plugged the drive into an isolated laptop, a junker I kept offline for exactly this kind of work, and waited for the screen to flicker to life. Unfolder, no encryption, no password, just a single video file named BSR_3_StarGuide. I clicked it open. The footage was terrible quality, degraded, like it had been copied and compressed too many times. It jittered and stuttered as it played, colors bleeding into each other, edges warping, as if the camera lens itself had been drunk. But even through the distortion, the setting was unmistakable. Corridors, wide and opulent, stretched out in impossible directions. Walls draped in velvet, chandeliers hanging low enough to touch. Gilded mirrors reflecting not just the people walking through them, but something behind them. Shapes that didn't match the figures in the foreground. The camera seemed to hover at shoulder height, tracking a small procession of women moving through the hallways. They were dressed in gowns and high heels, their faces turned away or blurred by motion. None of them spoke. and then she appeared. The figure wasn't front and center, almost as if the cameramen had tried to avoid capturing her too clearly, but it was enough. Her frame, her walk, the way her head tilted slightly downward, shoulders tight, like she was carrying the weight of a crown she couldn't take off. Beyoncé, or someone so close it made no difference. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't performing. She moved like someone trying to remember which door was the exit without tipping off the guards that she was thinking about leaving. Two men in dark suits flanked her, guiding her gently but firmly down the hallway. And then the audio kicked in. A voice, clipped and mechanical, layered over the footage like a training video for employees who were never supposed to think. The star must be guided. Do not let her see the final room. The footage ended abruptly after that, freezing on a frame where Beyoncé's figure hesitated at a junction in the corridor, caught between two branching paths. I sat there for a long time, the buzz of the overhead light filling the space where my thoughts should have been. It could have been faked. I told myself that. Deep fakes were getting better all the time. Anyone with a grudge and enough money could stitch together something convincing. But the decay of the footage, the way it shook and faltered like an old analog recording, the imperfections too messy to have been computer-generated, it didn't feel fake. It felt like something that was never supposed to see the surface. I pulled up the file's metadata, heart hammering in my chest. Most of it had been scrubbed, but not well enough. The origin tag pointed to a server cluster tied to a non-profit, one I recognized immediately. A foundation under Oprah's umbrella. The back of my neck prickled. This wasn't random. Someone had pulled this from a place they should have never had access to, or maybe someone inside the foundation had decided it was time to tip the scales. Was it Oprah herself? A quiet act of contrition from a woman who built her empire on stories of survival and empowerment? Or was it a rogue player? Someone who'd gotten tired of the silence, the complicity, the careful threading of needles through impossible moral mazes. I didn't know, and I didn't know if publishing it would make me a whistleblower or a target. If I leaked it without context, the world would tear itself apart trying to fill in the blanks. If I sat on it, I became part of the machine I'd spent my whole career trying to dismantle. I shut the laptop with a soft click, staring at the closed screen like it might start screaming at me. Across the room, my phone lit up, a private number flashing for just a second before vanishing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The message was clear enough. Eyes were already on me. I spent the next few hours pacing the apartment, checking the windows, unplugging every smart device, pulling the battery out of my main phone and tossing it into the freezer for good measure. Old school paranoia, the kind that keeps you breathing a little longer. By dawn, I still hadn't made a decision. The footage sat there, heavy as a loaded gun, waiting for me to pull the trigger. And in somewhere, in a boardroom or a penthouse or a bunker carved out beneath foundations no one was allowed to question, I knew there were people already calculating how much noise I could make and how much quieter the world would be if I simply disappeared. I wasn't naive. If I moved forward, there'd be no going back. But sometimes the weight of what you know presses harder than the weight of the consequences. And the more I thought about that voice on the tape, "Do not let her see the final room," the more I realized the final room wasn't just behind some locked door in a tunnel. It was here, in front of me. Lighting, Chapter 6. Panic at the Penthouse. I never thought I'd see him like that. Not him, not the man who could make a whole room stop breathing with just a glance, who moved through crowds like a storm wrapped in silk. But that night, standing in the ruins of what used to be his private sanctuary, all I saw was a man whose empire was cracking apart faster than he could claw it back together. It started with a phone call. I was posted outside the penthouse suite like always, one earpiece buzzing with half-heard chatter from the downstairs lobby. Everything had been tense for weeks. Rumors thick in the air, lawsuits multiplying, the wrong people asking the wrong questions. Still, he'd kept his composure until that call. I never heard what was said. Didn't need to. He burst out of the bedroom, barefoot, shirt unbuttoned, a phone clutched so tight in his hand I thought it might shatter. His face, God, his face. It wasn't rage, it was something worse. With terror, before I could react, he hurled the phone across the room. It hit a mirror by the bar cart and exploded into pieces. Glass rained down over the marble floor like a burst of frozen rain. She wasn't supposed to remember, he screamed, voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. He staggered toward the coffee table, kicking aside empty bottles, knocking over stacks of papers and folders that had been building up like a flood tide. People who had once been promises, he shouted, as if someone else was standing there arguing with him, as if invisible lawyers and managers and old handlers were still by his side. But they weren't. They had been peeling away for months, quiet exits, canceled meetings, changed numbers. Now it was just me and a couple others, the last few too scared, too loyal, or too stupid to leave. He tore through the room like a man possessed, grabbed the heavy armchair by the window and overturned it with a grunt. The wooden frame cracked against the floor. Shards of glass crunched under his bare feet, but he didn't seem to notice. He was talking to himself now, low and guttural. Not her, not the star. She was meant to shine, not wander. The smell of sweat thickened the air, mixing with the sour tang of spilled whiskey and something acrid. Burning paper. I realized, with a jolt, that he had set fire to a stack of documents in the fireplace. Flames licked up the sides of old contracts, grainy photographs, handwritten notes. "Call them," he barked at me suddenly, turning wild eyes in my direction. "Now, tell them to fix this. Tell her people I can still make it right." I didn't know who he meant. Oprah, Beyoncé's camp, someone else higher up the food chain I wasn't even cleared to know about. I picked up the backup phone from the kitchen counter with shaking hands and dialed the last handler he still had access to, or thought he did. The line rang. And rang. No one answered. When I hung up, he knew. He didn't need me to say anything. He let out this sound, not a yell, not a sob, something broken in between, and crumpled onto the floor next to the burning fireplace. I backed up a few steps, unsure whether he'd lash out at me next or just keep unraveling. Behind him, the penthouse was a wreck. Furniture splintered, artwork torn down, the scent of expensive cologne clinging uselessly to the walls, trying to cover the rot. His paranoia turned sharper by the minute. He accused Marcus, his most loyal bodyguard, the guy who once took a bottle to the face for him, of selling him out. He accused Tasha, the assistant who had stayed through 2 scandals already, of leaking the footage herself. He even accused me, though he didn't know my name half the time anymore. "Everyone's eating," he bellowed, swiping an arm across the bar and sending bottles crashing to the floor. "Everyone's got their mouth full and they're still hungry for more." I didn't argue. There was no point. Somewhere deep inside, maybe he knew. The footage, whatever it showed, had already started moving. It was out in the world now, shifting hands, gaining weight, too heavy for even the deepest pockets to smother. He was remembering things now, too. I could see it in the way his face twisted, flickering through old nights like film burning through a projector reel. Whispers in candlelit tunnels, doors opening onto velvet rooms, young stars stepping hesitantly through thresholds they didn't understand. Promises made in smoke and champagne and ironclad NDAs. Promises whispered in his ear by people who sat higher on the pyramid, who assured him that memory could be bought, edited, erased. He had believed them, believed he was untouchable, chosen, immortal. Now he was just another man trapped inside the crumbling walls of his own legend. I stood there, heart hammering, while he sobbed into his hands, smearing ash across his face, muttering names like prayers or curses. Some of them I recognized, some of them I didn't. And some of the ones that made him shake the hardest were names I would never dare repeat. When the fire burned down to coals and the penthouse had finally gone quiet except for the faint crackle of embers, I slipped out. No orders, no threats. Dice look, a silent command in his glassy, bloodshot eyes. Leave me to it. I left, down the service elevator, out through the parking garage, blending into the city night that smelled of wet concrete and exhaust fumes and broken dreams. Somewhere above me, in that shattered penthouse, he sat alone, clutching the last scraps of his kingdom. But even he had to know by now. No amount of screaming, no amount of burning, no amount of promises could unmake what had already started. Chapter 7. The things we can't unsee. The building we worked out of didn't have any signs out front. Just a blank facade of gray concrete, security cameras tucked into every corner, and doors that only opened with badges programmed daily. Even among agencies that prided themselves on silence, we were the quietest. The last stop for anything too strange, too dirty, or too dangerous to be processed the normal way. They handed us the drive in an unmarked envelope, no briefing. No chain of custody that we could trace, just a simple directive slipped under the lab door. Catalog, assess, discretion mandatory. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting something like this ever since the first ripples started hitting the news feeds. Lawsuits against Diddy multiplying like a virus, whispers of evidence too sensitive for open court. But expectation didn't soften the reality. The room we used for review was sterile by design. No windows, no wireless connections, just a bank of old monitors, a biometric vault for storage, and a logbook you signed in and out with by hand. I sat down in the cracked leather chair, booted up the isolated system, and plugged the drive into the reader. It took a few minutes to load. The files weren't large, but they were layered. Compression stacked on compression, like whoever had prepared them wanted to make damn sure nothing slipped through by accident. The first video opened in a glitchy blur. At first, all I could see was movement, shadows darting across a narrow hallway, walls painted deep red, light fixtures hanging low enough that taller people would have to duck. I ran a frame-by-frame analysis to stabilize the image. That's when the details started to bleed through. Mirrors lined the corridor on both sides, but they weren't decorative. The reflections didn't match perfectly. Slight distortions, delays of movement by a half second, like the mirrors weren't just reflecting, but recording, watching. The camera panned slowly forward, tracking a small group moving ahead. Women in evening gowns, heels clicking softly against the stone floor. Silent, heads bowed slightly. None of them spoke. The camera lingered just long enough to catch one figure at the center. Even with the blurring and warping, my gut tightened. The posture, the hair, the unmistakable magnetism of her presence. It resembled Beyoncé. I couldn't write that in an official memo, of course. Too risky, too explosive. So I filed it clinically. Subject: female, African American, adult, high profit of resemblance, details available upon authorized request. She didn't look harmed, but she didn't look comfortable either. She moved hesitantly, like she wasn't entirely sure where she was supposed to go. Like maybe she hadn't agreed to whatever was happening but also didn't know how to stop it. Two men in suits flanked her, guiding her down the hall without touching her, always close enough to correct her path if she veered. Audio analysis revealed something strange layered under the ambient sound. Whispered chants. Faint, barely audible without enhancement, like a choir breathing in rhythms just outside human hearing. I boosted the signal and caught fragments. Crown the star, guide the light, shield the song. The cadence was ritualistic, almost hypnotic. It wasn't just a party, it wasn't just security detail moving guests through a venue. It was something structured, designed. The footage cut to a larger room, vaulted ceilings painted with murals that didn't match any style I recognized. Figures of faceless people reaching upward, their arms outstretched toward a single floating crown surrounded by flames. Somewhere in the background, soft music played, a slow, looping progression of notes that seemed to stretch time itself. The woman resembling Beyoncé paused briefly in front of one mural, her reflection splitting into multiple fragments across the curved mirrors. She looked trapped. Not physically, but trapped all the same. I filed another note. Environment assessment, potential coercive psychological structure, subject disorientation observed, no direct harm recorded. The final clip was only a few seconds long. A door at the end of the hall opening, a brief glimpse of a deeper room bathed in golden light, and the woman caught between moving forward and retreating. The footage ended before she chose. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand down my face. The air in the review room felt heavier somehow, like the footage had bled into the walls themselves. I composed the official memo carefully, every word weighed like a bomb technician handling live ordnance. Presence noted. Subject appears disoriented but unharmed. Potential coercive environment. Further review needed. No accusations, no conclusions, just enough to signal that something wasn't right without painting a target on my own back. But privately, inside the file labeled confidential observations that would never leave this room, I added another note. Footage suggests ritualistic orchestration of celebrity movement within constructed underground environments, strong indicators of broader systemic coordination. Current sample size insufficient. Further footage likely exists. That was the part that twisted in my gut harder than anything else. There were more tape. This wasn't a one-off. The structure of the event, the layers of security, the mirrored corridors, the chants, it was too polished, too practiced, too intentional to have been thrown together for a single night. It was a system, a machine operating just out of sight, designed to mold and guide those who glittered brightest, binding them to something older and darker than mere fame. I logged the drive into the evidence vault, sealed it behind 4 inches of reinforced steel, and signed the ledger with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. As I walked back through the empty halls of the agency, every reflective surface, every window, every polished floor tile seemed to shimmer at the edges of my vision. I didn't dare look too closely. Some things once glimpsed refused to be unseen. And some reflections, if you stare long enough, start staring back. Chapter 8. The Room Behind the Room. The bag on my shoulder was heavier than it should have been. Not from weight, not really. Flash drives, documents, an old burner phone. None of that amounted to much physically. But the burden of it, the burden made every step feel like I was wading through deep water. I hadn't slept in days, not properly. Not without waking up gasping in dark motel rooms, certain that any second the door would be kicked in, that hands would drag me away before I could finish what I needed to do. But I was close now. I kept to the alleys, walked with my head down, ball cap pulled low, jacket zipped to my chin. Same city I grew up in, but it didn't recognize me anymore. Or maybe it did, and that's why the streets felt like they were pushing against me at every turn. There was one tape left, one I hadn't sent to the journalist, one I hadn't dared put online, hadn't even copied. Some things you don't duplicate. You carry them like curses, waiting for the right moment to hand them off, if such a moment ever comes. I found it by accident the night I dug through the last server, the one they didn't know still existed. tucked deep inside a directory labeled only with a single letter, R. The file was old. You could feel it somehow, even before hitting play, like the digital equivalent of yellowed paper and fading ink. I've watched it once, and that was enough to break the last pieces of whatever safe illusions I'd been clinging to. The footage opened not in a tunnel, not in the velvet-lined hallways or mirrored corridors I'd come to expect. It opened on a door. The plain wooden door, painted black, no markings. Someone, the camera operator, pushed it open slowly. Beyond it, a hidden hallway. Longer than it should have been, narrower, the walls paneled in rich mahogany, the floor covered in thick crimson carpet, muffling every step. Soft lights flickered overhead, not electric but gas lamps, their flames dancing gently in the unseen breeze. At the far end of the hallway, another door. I don't know how long the footage stayed there, just holding on that image, that endless walk. Seconds, maybe, or hours. Time twisted strangely around the frame. Finally, the door opened inward and revealed the room behind the room. Velvet chairs arranged in perfect circles, worn but still elegant. Antique chandeliers hanging like captured constellations. Children's paintings covered the walls, crude, colorful images of crowns, stars, faceless figures holding hands. None of the paintings were signed. None were dated. In the center of the room, a small stage barely a foot off the ground, ringed by golden rope. Figures moved within. Not violent, not angry. Like directing. Whispering, things we couldn't quite hear to unseen players moving just beyond the camera's edge. The sense of it, the feeling, wasn't sinister the way I'd expected. It was colder, clinical, like gardeners tending to fragile, precious flowers. Not breaking them, shaping them. Above it all, drifting through the air like a hymn. A voice, smooth, familiar, powerful. At first I thought it had to be a trick, a coincidence, a sound alike. But deep in my gut I knew it was Oprah. Or someone who sounded so much like her, it didn't matter anymore. And the voice said, "They will forget the corridors, they'll remember the crowns." Yeah, I paused the footage there. I couldn't keep watching. It wasn't the imagery that undid me. It was the certainty behind those words. The calm acceptance. The knowledge that everything we were fed, the stories of struggle, triumph, innocence, were carefully molded relics of something that had been built beneath our feet, without our consent, without even our awareness. I copied the tape once onto a drive, encrypted it 6 ways, and destroyed the original. And now here I was, walking into the mouth of a battered post office on the edge of nowhere, slipping the package into a prepaid envelope addressed to a contact so deeply buried even I didn't know who they were anymore. The clerk didn't look up as I paid cash, as I slid the package across the counter with a hand that trembled just slightly. When I stepped back into the cold, the wind hit me full in the face. It tasted like iron, like a warning. I didn't stop moving. I would disappear now, just another shadow among many. Not for safety, there was no real safety left for people like me, but because some stories are too big to survive standing still. The footage would surface eventually. Or it wouldn't. Maybe it would vanish into another vault, another foundation, another locked drawer in a room behind a room. But even if the images never reached the world, the truth of it would hum under the surface. A vibration no one could ever fully silence. I kept walking, my breath fogging the air in front of me. And as the city swallowed me whole, I whispered to no one, to everyone, to whoever might still be listening. The tunnels weren't for hiding bodies, they were for hiding memories.